the Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burton, Gary Cape
and Stephen Molyneux.
Welcome to another edition of the Arabian Racing Podcast. I'm joined by Gary Capewell and Stephen Molyneux. Today we'll be reviewing the ArabianRacehorse.com International Condition Stakes at Newbury, which was run previously this week and which was won by Farha, a horse that we all thought had a few question marks over. Gary, good morning.
Good morning.
And Stephen, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, all good. Great win for Holly to have her first Arabian winner, given her family's had such a connection with the breed. She won well, I thought.
She did. We've often talked about quite a lot in sort of glowing terms, and the potential has always been there for that type of performance, which we saw, I think. She hasn't always completely delivered. Sometimes she's been a little bit unlucky. Sometimes things haven't dropped right. Sometimes she hasn't been good enough. Probably a combination of all those three things in some of those runs. But the combination of the soft ground, the change of headgear, the fact that Holly Doyle was on as well, I think you referenced in the preview that she has a better record when she's ridden by female jockeys. I think it all came together. The softer ground, I think, helped as well. I was taken with how she did it. I think obviously the main or the top rated horse, Alcasa, was disappointed for whatever reason. I'm not sure he was completely in love with the ground, but you can't take nothing away from the winner. She's threatened to do that type of performance before, and it's nice to see her finally put it all together.
Yeah, and I think switching back to cheek pieces, which she's worn overseas and been placed in Mons, may have helped, may not have helped. I mean, speaking to Holly after the race.
Wherever I was getting better, I just watched her replays, and she seems to travel ever so well and just not find as much as you think. So I just filled her up for as long as I could, and then led an infant at, just under 2 out, and she's responded really well on. I think she really loved this ground, to be honest.
Stephen, what did you think from you?
Yeah, as Gary said, there were probably 2 or 3 different variables in place for her, weren't they, that enabled her to almost confirm earlier promise, really. The ground obviously seemed pretty testing, and I think the run of the race as well. I mean, Holly Doyle's rise through the ranks is a feature of it for me has always been Holly having her horses in the right places, and Farha was very much that. I mean, the pace didn't seem that strong to me. It was dictated by ARH, who was one of the lower rated horses in the race with form. That one eventually finished 5th and certainly outran its rating. So there was probably an element of being able to dictate, and you could see the debutantes who were in danger of tailing off at one stage, around about halfway, 5 furlongs out, they were able to close up. So I thought it was probably quite a cute ride from the front 2, and Farha was always in that position. The ground has certainly played against 1 or 2. Alcasa just looked a little bit reluctant, really. Jim Crowley wasn't overly hard on the horse, but very notable. The one crack of the whip it did get, he sort of hung left and just didn't look very keen, and that was probably allied with the ground. So, I mean, Farha only rated 87, was beating, on paper, superior horses with 1 or 2 things that were very much in her favour. But I think the ground and the run of the race were 2 of the key factors in that.
Yeah, and I think, again, we've talked a lot about horses perhaps not taking the opportunities to run this season. I think probably Loire would have finished closer had she'd had a run previously, but then if this is her prep race, then that's an understandable decision, and she ran well.
Yeah, I think it was a very fair seasonal return for her, wasn't it? She's only had a handful of starts, not even a handful of starts in her career, has she now? So just the 4th start, still learning a little bit, kept on, possibly in need of the run, as you say. It almost looked like she blew up to a certain degree and then ran on again. Was never catching the winner, but in the end has pulled nicely clear of Tufan and 3rd. I haven't checked the new handicap marks. Actually, I'm not sure if they've even been published, but I'm not sure what Stephen's done certainly with the winner anyway.
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet, right? Okay. Because again, because you've got these conditions races from a handicapping point of view. Again, it must be a nightmare to try and sort of sort them out. At least you've got because you've got the likes of Loire, Tufan, the younger unexposed horses, but I suppose you've got the likes of Farha, you can kind of rate the race around, and obviously Alcasa, but obviously he was disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, look, any horse that wins any race, unless they've dropped a lot in the weights going into it, you've got to assume that they've improved to some degree. And you can probably, with Lula 95 going into the race, as we've already alluded to, she probably needed it to some degree. And then you've got Tufan, who for me was definitely building on his reappearance when it looked as though he was going to need the run, and conceding £4 to Farha. You're probably looking at early 90s as a sort of a level that Farha's run to. And then, yeah, Alcázar just very disappointing. Ortar has probably improved to some degree, obviously lightly raced, and has improved for that one's initial runs this season. But I do think to some degree flattered by the run of the race. So maybe I'd be a little bit kinder on that one and not raise his mark from 70. But yeah, I think the ground has clearly enabled her to improve to some degree and will probably be rated accordingly.
And of course, she has dropped down the weight. She has been rated higher. So it's not, she's not winning out of turn, as we've said before.
Yeah, 90, I think, at her peak, a couple of runs back at Chelmsford. And yeah, she was having a third start of the season. So there was probably a lot in her favour in hindsight if fitness is a key component, particularly on the ground. It certainly caught out one or two. So yeah, maybe not such a surprising outcome in the end.
And now we're going to move on to our next race, which is at Windsor on Monday. It's our first visit to Windsor this year. That's for the another Wathba Stallions Cup. It's a 0 to 65, also over a mile and a quarter. Currently, I had a look on the BHA website this morning, and they've obviously racing today, tomorrow, and Monday. They're giving the grounders good to soft in places. However, the prediction possibly is it will be softer on Monday because they're expecting overnight rain. So that's another thing to factor into what already looks like quite a difficult handicap to sort out. Gary, what did you think?
Well, they abandoned the meeting there, didn't they, last Monday because of waterlogging? So it's the water table will be fairly high. What did I think? I was ready to get a pin, if I'm perfectly honest. I thought this was probably one of the trickiest races I'd seen for a long time. You've got the experienced handicappers, the likes of Al Jawaha, who's probably seen better days, but is still capable enough on his day and has continued to drop down in the weights. Bin Al-Ri, who won at Bath earlier on in the season, Samawat, who looked as though she would improve for the seasonal return as well. You've got Dill of Thomas's pair. These are the more exposed, the horses that we know plenty about, if you like. And then you've got the likes of Falcon du Roche, Amy, Run the Risk, who are probably a little bit less exposed and maybe open to a little bit more improvement, particularly in this type of grade. They haven't had that many chances to run in this type of grade, which I think will be key. I went around and round in circles. So I should mention the top weight as well. Seraphim Fort, who I think will strip fitter for the seasonal return. And I thought it was interesting that down at the bottom, Gurko de Tonnel had got Josie Gordon booked a ride. Obviously seemed to improve a little bit when Holly Doyle rode at Bath, then took a backward step almost last time out. Perhaps maybe stronger handling, and if they can get the horse a bit more prominent and a bit more interested in the early stages, it may well suit. In terms from a selection, I was going to take a bit of a flyer with Samawat because I know that she has got form with a little bit of cut in the ground, albeit you have to go back a fair way for it. But I wondered whether they might try and make the running with her as well, which they have done. They did a couple of times last year when she was obviously second a couple of times at Wolverhampton, wasn't she? So she was fairly prominent on both those occasions. She didn't run too badly, I didn't think, at Chelmsford, where she did lead in that race won by Sahis, the race in which Seraphim Forter was a place behind. So I was going to take a bit of a flyer with Samawat. I thought Joey Haynes was a positive jockey booking if he is indeed going to the meeting. Obviously, the decks were done. The decks were done yesterday, weren't they? So I haven't checked if he's going to be there or not as yet. But if he is, then I was going to take a chance on Samawat. But it was a race that I didn't particularly have a strong view in, I must admit. Yeah,
and to be honest, Gary, I can say that's who I have gone for for similar reasons. Partly, one of the problems, and we mentioned it before in this program, it's a harder year this year obviously because of COVID last year and the restriction of races that we've had, we only had 14 races last year, and they're all on the all weather. And as we saw with Bin Alri, some horses are definitely better suited to being on the turf, which his trainer quite freely stated before he won at Bath. Obviously Bath, it was rattling quick that day, and it's certainly not going to be like that at Windsor on Monday. His form on the soft ground isn't quite as strong, and obviously it's 2 furlongs further. With Samawat, she has, as you say, you mentioned she's got form on easier ground. She's also, in a strict interpretation of form, she's better off with Seraphim Forte, who she was runner-up to when Seraphim Forte won at Wolverhampton last year. With the jockeys getting a £6 allowance for there not being a sauna, how many of these weights are actually genuine when it comes to race day? Which is something that, at the end of the day, all trainers are going to want their jockeys to be riding to the weight that they've been allocated. But with that amount of allowance and, a number of amateurs riding in the race, whether they will be bang on the weights they're supposed to be, I'm not quite sure. I mean, how do you take that, Stephen?
Yeah, it's one of those imponderables, isn't it, that we never really have known right throughout COVID, and as to what, what horses actually carrying what weight. I mean, 8 stone H at the bottom. Well, obviously Norseman's right down the bottom at 8 stone, but I mean, at 8 stone 8, Josephine Gordon on Gurko de Tonnelle, for example, I think that would be probably on the low side for her, and maybe she'd be 3 or 4 pounds. But unless these sort of things are published, there's just no way of knowing. I think when the ground becomes as soft as it is as well, almost the weights probably become immaterial, and you're just looking for a horse that handles it, and that's got the ability. And obviously, in terms of proven recent form, then Bin Alri stands out, and is a horse that's always threatened to rank a bit higher than it has done. Delveth Thomas's K Clare's got a very good record fresh. Obviously, we've not seen too much from that stable over the last couple of years, so don't quite know as to how good a condition they're going to be in. And then, as Gary mentioned, the kind of the younger unexposed horses run the risk. Amy and Falcon de Roche, who are quite clearly open to some improvement, but really, particularly in the case of Run the Risk and Amy, haven't shown a great deal so far. So it just makes for a very tricky race. And I think the standard go-to has often been James Owen in this respect, hasn't it? And Seraphim Forte, albeit having shown very little so far this season. In theory, it's not a drop in grade. It's still a 0 to 65, same as he contested at Chelmsford last time. But I just feel as though that if he can bounce back to his Wolverhampton form from last year, when he won quite decisively off a mark of 60, he's going to be a threat. But these lower grade handicaps, should we say, are very difficult to solve indeed.
Yeah, and I mean, both of James's sport first-time headgear. Seraphim Forte's got a hood on, and I know when I spoke to Alex last year, he said he was quite a buzzy horse, and initially he used to have to ride him out in the dark at Newmarket, which suggests that maybe a hood is likely to help his chances this time. Certainly when he started off at Bath this year behind Bin Alri, and he looked plenty fit enough then. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Whether maybe he didn't like the firm ground at Bath was possibly an excuse. And certainly, he went far too quick, and pretty much set with Samawat at Chelmsford. And as we said before, that really set the race up for Sahis, who benefited greatly from coming off the pace that they put in. So, I mean, both Seraphim Forte and Samawat should put in a better performance in this race, one would think. And I think it is important to remember this is the most valuable race of this grade this season. So, everybody's going to be wanting to win it. We've got the smaller stables. Alger were here, as Gary said, fair horse in his day. I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe finish just outside of the frame, really. He's had a great record in this race. Whether he'll be quite fit enough is obviously going to be a question mark against some of these who've had a run. Interesting that Steve has booked Daniel Ellis. He's had 25 pony ride wins. He's won a few points. He rode in the Sheikha Fatima pony race at this meeting, not this meeting, but at Windsor 2 years ago, and finished third. He's been placed in a hunter chase at Cheltenham. So he's obviously knows his way around a racecourse, and certainly he's been around this racecourse before. So his £7 might be helpful, but whether it will be helpful enough against some of these young, quite potentially improving types, we'll find out on Monday.
Yeah, interesting. I thought I recognised the name. I couldn't think where from, to be honest. But yeah, I remember that riding in that pony race now. And Al Jawara himself, he has got forming cut in the ground. Okay, you've got to go a long, long, long way back. But you know that he should, well, he's got forming conditions anyway, which sounds like it's going to be a bit of a plus.
Stephen?
Yeah, the only thing I mentioned is about Gurko de Tournelle. I mentioned Bin Al-Ree have felt that he could always rank higher. I don't think either run so far this season for Gurko de Tournelle has shown him to any sort of effect really. At Bath, kind of Holly Doyle rushed him up, and he sort of got a sniff of the lead before fading, and then Chelmsford, basically his race was over right at the start, and you've already alluded to that Josephine Gordon might want to be a bit more prominent on this occasion. The horse will have to be more tractable out of the stalls, but from a fairly small stable, horses are more likely to improve with racing fitness wise than be ready first time. And this is basically just a horse that's not really had a smooth career. Started off in a Group 1, a couple more runs last year, and as we've already said, came from France initially anyway, so was entitled to take a bit of time to get used to racing over here. So he'd be one that I think could be better than 44, but will need to be, because in any handicap, obviously the better horses are towards the top of the weights, and it's not often you see those down the bottom come out on top.
Yeah, and I think another horse that obviously is going to be better than the rating he's currently got is Run the Risk. He's a half brother to a horse that we all affectionately known as Jeffrey of Sue Harrods, who was by Jaffa. You should probably remember the dam Jalbita, Gary, I would think.
Yeah, I do. She was a decent handicapper. She used to run in all those Premier handicaps. She ran obviously a couple of times she might have even been placed a couple of times, or certainly once, I think, at the in the mile handicap on Dubai International Arabian Race Day. She certainly had plenty of form at Newbury anyway, and yeah, I seem to remember her winning at, I think, Taunton or somewhere like that, albeit good, probably more than that, probably 7 or 8 years ago now.
Yeah, and obviously he's had the benefit of a run now. I know Sue prepared him initially down in the West Country, and the addition of blinkers instead of cheap pieces could quite easily see him move forward, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like Stephen said, it'll need to on what we saw on that debut effort, but or the most recent run. Yeah, it was debut, wasn't it? Yeah. He's going to need to improve for that, but going into handicap company, he's got a chance to do that.
I'm just on a hide into nothing really with those horses, aren't I? Amy, Run the Risk.
Yeah,
it's the back.
Blame the handicapper. It's always a good idea.
back to the old story of not really having any sort of a chance to win a maiden. So let's try and get them into handicaps as soon as possible, and then could quite easily make me look a fool at Windsor. But yeah, there was just very, very little to go on. But there's no point, as I keep saying, these horses running in maidens again. So give them a chance.
No, and both Amy and Run the Risk actually now have the benefit of professional jockeys this time. Amy's going to have Ray Dawson on board, and David Probert takes a ride on Run the Risk. So, much as we've said about Gurko de Tournelle, somebody a bit more experienced to catch hold of them and give them a strong ride might make all the difference.
Definitely. As I said, with Gurko de Tournelle, I think it was half an improved performance, wasn't it, at Bath? It's certainly, the horse got a little bit more involved, at least, than we had seen in some of the previous runs. So I should imagine Josie Gordon, who obviously we saw riding Ortar at Newbury last week, will want to be trying prominent on this horse. Or at least I think that would probably see the horse to best effect anyway.
The thing with those two horses as well, they both ran at Lingfield, Amy and Run the Risk. I mean, Windsor's an idiosyncratic track, but Lingfield on the poly track must be pretty difficult for any inexperienced horse making its debut. So they're going to find even Windsor a lot more, I'd say, conventional than Lingfield's poly track.
Yeah, and going back to what Gary said about Samawat, and to be fair, Seraphim Forter, who's been quite happy in front as well. Windsor does tend to suit front runners to a certain degree. So it'll be an interesting race on Monday, that's for sure. You'll be there, won't you, Gary?
I will. We'll give the jockeys the steer whether they end up going over to that far rail or not, I should imagine.
And our next race after that we'll be back at Newbury for another conditions race. This one will be sponsored by the Emirates Breeders. Run over 6 furlongs. It's what would have been the Zabeel Prep. Quite a few familiar faces in there. So we'll look forward to previewing that race when we review the Windsor race later on next week. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Stephen.
No problem. Not sure where I'll be, where in the world this time next week, but yeah, I'll be looking forward to those races.
Be mid-flight. That could be interesting. We could do one of the Zoom calls, because the Wi-Fi is quite good. There'll be nobody on the plane, so you'll be all right.
I wouldn't bank on it. The plane was full. COVID doesn't exist up in the air.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, guys, and look forward to catching up next week.